Europe is ageing and birth rates are collapsing.
Italy's national birth rate has fallen to its lowest level on record.
Europe's population is set to fall from 750 to 570 million within 6 decades. And this will have profound economic and social costs. In the 1950s, 1 in 12 people were over 65. Now it is 1 in every 4. At the end of the century, it will be 1 in 3. That's 33% of a population above retirement age and in need of more medical health care. Can we afford this kind of change? How will Europe pay for its ageing population? Who will do the work? Or are the fearmongers wrong? Could a population decline actually be exactly what we need? Between 1963 and 1981, the world's population doubled, sparking fears of unsustainable growth in the world's population. But recent models offer a very different vision. Societies decimated by ever-declining populations and a shrinking base of young people. The UN forecasts that the population will peak around 10 billion, but a more pessimistic model suggests that much faster than expected falls in birth rates would mean the world population could fall to 6 billion by the end of the century. But one thing that isn't controversial is the decline in Europe's population. It is already happening, and politicians are starting to sound the alarm bell.
The ailing numbers have been declared a national emergency, prompting reassurance from the Prime Minister to try to boost the population in coming years.
This is Europe's population pyramid. By the end of the century, the biggest age group will be the over 85s. But what are the costs of this? Like many countries, Italy's debt to GDP has soared in recent years. How will it manage with a shrinking population, declining economy, falling tax revenues, and an ageing population? Japan is an example of what Europe might face in the future. The first country with a major population decline has experienced periods of deflation, rising debt, and low economic growth. Italy's fertility rate of 1.2 is one of the lowest in the world, but it is not unique. Other European countries are doing little better, and the COVID years have only accelerated the trend to a lower population. Already Italy has seen old villages hollowed out as people leave, and this is a foretaste of what might be to come. Worried by the decline in populations, politicians have talked about the need to change the situation, but so far they have proved relatively powerless, tinkering at the edges and encouraging people to have more children as a patriotic duty does little to change the powerful forces that have decreased birth rate. Why are birth rates falling so fast? The first reason for falling birth rates is a success story. Improved education and greater equality for women has led to women delaying getting married and having children. But also a growing factor is the economic costs of having children. We are facing the first generation where children are likely to be worse off than their parents. In particular, hit by soaring housing costs, young people can't afford the economic burden of having more children. And it's ironic that it is economic hardship that is a leading cause of this impending population decline, which itself will have many economic costs on society. Why does it matter if birth rates fall so much? Since the global financial crisis, the world economy has slowed down. Europe in particular has struggled, falling behind the likes of China, India and the US. If the population continues to fall, it will put more pressure on anemic economic growth. The problem is that European countries have little room for manoeuvre. National debt has soared due to the financial crisis, low growth, COVID and then the Ukraine war. An ageing population will cause a double whammy of falling tax revenues and higher spending on pension and healthcare. However, there's more bad news to come. Europe, like the rest of the world, is attempting a transition to a green economy, an economy less reliant on Russian energy. This will require expensive investment. But at the same time, long-term interest rates, which were low for so long, have soared in recent years. For example, the UK's interest payments have really increased dramatically in the past few years due to the unexpected high inflation and increase in interest rates. And this is a problem that all European countries will face. Demographic factors will continue to push up government spending just as tax revenues fall. Tax rates as a share of GDP have been rising steadily for recent years, but how much more can tax rates keep rising? The problem is that we are living longer, but healthy life expectancy is not necessarily keeping up. As people live longer, we face a range of new health conditions which need expensive treatment. For example, it is estimated by 2050, 2.2 million people living in Italy will be living with some form of dementia. An academic report put the average annual cost of a dementia patient in the region of €70,000 per year. And this is before the emotional and time costs on caregivers and family. It is not just that the younger generation will face higher taxes and lower growth, but they will need to spend more time looking after their ageing parents. In Italy, pension spending as a share of GDP is already 16%, but this is before the population will age further. The UK has a relatively low share of pension spending, but if the current trend is maintained, the economists predict it could rise to 25% in the next few decades. How is this going to be paid for? There's no easy answers. Politicians generally avoid taking difficult decisions. When France sought to rein in pension spending and raise the retirement age, it caused mass demonstrations. It's not popular to tell people they are facing a worse trade-off. The post-war boom years, where we could spend more on healthcare and pensions just from the proceeds of economic growth, is unlikely to be replicated. And it's not just the economic impact, but also geopolitical effects of a falling birth rate. In 2100, there could easily be more people living in one African country, Nigeria, than the whole of a European continent. Given that developing countries have scope to catch up with Western living standards, it will mark a profound change in geopolitical influence. Now, in the 19th century, Thomas Malthus warned that exponential population growth would cause mass starvation and a collapse of economies. Fortunately, he was completely wrong. He completely failed to understand how new technologies and increased productivity would enable society not only cope but thrive with growing populations. So is there the danger of making the same mistake? Could we actually cope and thrive with a fall in the population? Firstly, technology is still growing at an exponential rate. Artificial intelligence is raising the possibility that many manual jobs could be done by technology, meaning fewer workers will be needed in the future. If AI succeeds as predicted, labour productivity will continue to grow, and if governments can tax the profits from artificial intelligence, then there is a scope for paying for pensions and healthcare from this. Secondly, technology is likely to lead to breakthroughs in energy generation. Solar power has been improving at exponential rates, and there is scope for new energy such as geothermal, nuclear fission. In Iceland, energy is already virtually free, and this could easily spread to the rest of Europe in the next few decades, and this would radically change society, economies, and living standards. At the moment, one of the great challenges facing young people is the housing crisis, because the population has grown faster than its ability or willingness to build new houses. But if the population really did start to fall in the future, it would lead in theory to cheaper and more plentiful housing. And this might even help pick up birth rates again. Also, one of the great challenges the world will face in coming decades, if not now, is the economic and environmental impact of global warming and increased pollution. A falling population will lead to less power consumption, lower pollution, and reduced carbon emissions. Fewer people would be a boon to improving the environment and cause the demand for fossil fuels to decline to virtually nothing. The age of relying on dictatorships for fossil fuel imports would be over. Now, back in the 1930s, John Maynard Keynes, a famous economist, predicted his children would be able to do a 15-hour week. He believed new technology would enable people to work fewer hours. Alas, he wasn't right. AI could be the breakthrough which enables the automation of jobs, giving people more time to look after their elderly relatives. But there are still a few concerns about this more optimistic scenario. Firstly, if artificial intelligence does replace many jobs, who will benefit from this technological breakthrough? Will benefits be equally shared throughout the population, e.g. a universal basic income, or will the profits be captured by a few big multinationals, who use global tax avoidance to hide the profits from governments? If this happens, we could get the worst of both worlds, AI taking jobs, leaving people unemployed, but not getting the benefits. And secondly, is this brave new world of technology really so desirable? Do we want to be cared for in our declining years by robots without a soul? The impact of falling birth rates is going to be very large for Europe. But what about the impact on today's younger generation? So far, the young have been really struggling to gain the same security and wage growth as their parents' generation. This video goes into more detail about why young generations are worse off